Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Julian Seabra. I'm the Chief of the Innovation and Creativity Division at the Inter-American Development Bank. And I'm thrilled to celebrate World Creativity and Innovation Day, April 21st, with a friend, an inspiration, and a mentor for many of us who work at the intersections of entrepreneurship, innovation, and creativity. Professor Tina Seelig. Tina, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's such a delight.
So before we start, I need all of you to know who is Tina, and why she's here with us. So Tina is the executive director of the Knight Hennessy Scholars at Stanford University. She's director emeritus of the Stanford Technology and Ventures Program, where she served as executive director, faculty director, and professor of the practice in the Department of Management Science and Engineering. For the past 20 years, she has taught courses on creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship, in management science and engineering, bioengineering, and the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design, the D School at Stanford. Dr. Seelig earned a PhD in neuroscience from Stanford University School of Medicine, and has worked as a management consultant, as a multimedia producer, and was the founder of a multimedia company. She's the author of 17 books, including Ingenious, Creativity Rules, and What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20, published by HarperCollins, and is a recipient of the Gordon Prize from the National Academy of Engineering, the Olympus Innovation Award, and the Silicon Valley Visionary Award. I'm tired.
I know, I'm just really old. I'm just really old.
But most importantly, an internal joke. I know Tina for at least 15 years. 15 years ago, Tina had an amazing initiative called Roundtable on Entrepreneurship Educators in Stanford and across the globe. I met her a few times in Brazil, in Chile, and she was crazy enough at that point to authorize a satellite version of this roundtable in Brazil, which was extremely successful at that point. And since then, I think many of us share enormous admiration for you, Tina. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And before I start this conversation, so let me explain to our audience how it's going to work. It's going to be a conversation between us. You have the capacity to share questions and send it to us either via chat or social media. We are tuned in for receiving your questions. We are gonna take around 45 minutes on this Q&A. But before we start, Tina, I wonder if you can share a little bit about your current challenge, the Knight Hennessy Scholars. So welcome again.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm delighted to tell you about Knight Hennessy Scholars. I started this new role 2.5 years ago after teaching entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial leadership for the last 20 years. Before that, Knight Hennessy Scholars is an incredibly special program at Stanford. Let me tell you what Knight and Hennessy are. So let's start with Hennessy. John Hennessy was the president of Stanford, very beloved and very well-respected president of Stanford for 16 years. And under his leadership, the university just was thriving. He also is currently the chairman of the board of Google or Alphabet. And when he stepped down from his role as president of the university, he said, "I'm not done yet," and decided he really wanted to continue to make a big impact and launch this initiative to bring future leaders to Stanford to hone their leadership skills. And Knight is Phil Knight, as in Nike. And he was so excited about this idea that he put his name on the program. But he said he'd only put his name on it if John Hennessy's name was there too. So that's why it's called Knight Hennessy Scholars. And what happens is students apply to Knight Hennessy Scholars at the same time that they are applying to Stanford for graduate school. And we admit people from all 7 schools at Stanford: medicine, business, law, engineering, humanities, education, sustainability, all 7 schools. And so these students come in, we accept up to 100 students a year, and they are given funding for 3 years for their education. So their tuition, a stipend for 3 years. They have this global community that is also multidisciplinary, so a multicultural and multidisciplinary community. And then we have this very robust leadership program that they go through while they're doing graduate school. So I know it's a mouthful, but it's been just a huge pleasure to come in, to build our leadership model, to put together our programming, and to essentially work with these young people to really help them become leaders, future leaders.
And I imagine it's open for students from around the world.
Absolutely. In fact, I would love to have students, more applicants from Latin America, more applicants. So it's yes. And I'm happy if we have time anytime later, I'm happy to tell you about some of the aspects of our program, because it's very robust and the things that we're offering are quite remarkable. I'm just going to give you one. Can I give you one that happened last night?
Go ahead.
So we host our keynote lecture every quarter. We bring in someone who of world renowned. Last quarter, it was Al Gore, and former vice president of of the United States, former vice president of the United States. And we did a whole program on the environment and our students interviewing him. It was really amazing. Last night, we had a fellow named James Manika speak, and he is in charge of ethics in artificial intelligence at Google. And he was on Nightline, he was on 60 Minutes just on Sunday night. And he was amazing. The conversation could have gone on all night, talking about the future of AI and ChatGPT. And the students were just so on fire, having an opportunity to talk about these really cutting edge issues.
So I'll pick your brain at some point in this conversation, because this question about creativity and ChatGPT is one that is recurrent for those who work with us.
Right.
So, Tina, I want to start with a very simple question that you have already answered multiple times, but I think it's important on the context of what we are celebrating today. I heard you once in a podcast explaining how you see the difference between imagination, creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship.
Great.
And I wonder if you can share your thoughts about this so we can start.
I thank you so much. I love that question. It's something I care deeply about, because I think one of the major problems we have with innovation is that we don't define it clearly. If we asked everybody in this webinar to define innovation, we'd have that many different definitions. And so I decided, as someone who teaches creativity and innovation, to put a stake in the ground and say, here are the definitions that I think really make sense. I wanted definitions that were really clear and crisp, easy to remember, easy to learn, easy to share with others. So here they are. Imagination is envisioning things that don't exist. Super simple, right? But we do this all the time. And it's certainly when we're children, this is something that comes very, very naturally, is imagination. Creativity is applying your imagination to address a problem. So applying your ability to envision things that don't exist to solve a problem. So for example, if you're hungry, you open the refrigerator, you apply your ability to imagine, a peanut butter sandwich to solve that problem. Innovation is different from creativity. Innovation builds on it. Innovation is applying creativity to come up with a unique solution. So a creative idea might be new to you, but an innovative solution is new to the world. And there are times in which you really, really need a creative solution. You just need something that's, I don't care if I've invented it, it just is going to solve the problem. And there are times you really need an innovation that pushes things further. And then finally, entrepreneurship is applying the innovation to scale the idea and bring it to others. And I like to compare this to a baby learning to talk. A baby naturally babbles. They apply those sounds to make words. the words to make sentences, and the sentences to make stories. And it's the same type of hierarchy that happens in the creative process.
Very good, Tina. And every time I hear, it sounds like it's so easy when you explain. So thank you for sharing this. And
Sure.
one other aspect that I want to address with you is the role of constraints on fostering creativity. How do you see them? And if you can elaborate also, not only on how do you see constraints in creativity and what's the tension between them, but also how do you see creativity and those constraints on the short term and on the long term. So how do you see the impact of constraints on both short and long term?
Yeah, so you could look at this question in a couple of different ways. So I'm going to answer both ways.
Go ahead.
One is, how can constraints stimulate creativity?
Perfect.
The other is, what are the constraints to creativity? Did you have one of those in mind?
I have both of them in mind. So
okay, good. So
you already solved me one question. So go ahead.
So let's talk about first constraints in stimulating creativity.
All right.
Constraints are an incredible stimulant of creativity. Oftentimes, it's when we are most constrained that we end up coming up with the most interesting solutions. I mean, think of, I guess a classic example is Apollo 13. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie or remember that in 1970, the astronauts were on their way to the moon and, there was an oxygen tank that blew up and they needed to quickly solve the problem of getting these astronauts safely back to Earth. And oxygen was decreasing, carbon dioxide was going up. They had really limited time, lives were on the line. And in this case, they had to figure out what they could do with the very limited things they had in this space capsule. And they were able to use things in very unusual ways, like literally pulling the cover off of the manual and using the cover, not as a manual cover, but using it in a different purpose, figure out how to connect things that weren't typically connected and using the things they had available. So that's an extreme example, but this happens every single day. I think about during COVID, when we were all of a sudden very constrained of what we could do and the creativity that was unleashed. I know that for me, I viewed it as one of the most generative times in my life. I was like, okay, what can I do with these limited resources? So there were lots of students who lost their summer internships when everyone went remote. And so I said, what can I do with what I have? And so I launched a virtual summer internships program, and we ended up doing it for hundreds of students, where we were able to give them an opportunity to have an internship that we did remotely, where we tapped into the resources we had. We have a huge collection at Stanford of online media around entrepreneurship, and I had them curating the content into different collections that we could use, and also they could then put this on their resume that they were interns with our program during the summer. So it was a win-win, and it's something I never would have thought of until we actually had those constraints. So constraints can be extremely, extremely stimulating. And I give a whole talk on this, on creativity with constraints. And I want to point out that there are lots of different types of constraints, right? There are input constraints, there are process constraints, there are output constraints. And so when you think about constraints, they're not all the same. Sometimes the constraints are things like you only have $5 in 2 hours, right? The constraint could be you have to use this methodology. It could be the product that you make has to fit in your back pocket. So think about the types of constraints you have and and how you're going to use them to stimulate creativity. So then there's the other question of how can constraints inhibit creativity?
Yes.
And these usually come from organizational constraints, where, especially around failure. If you are in an organization where you're not allowed to fail and experimentation is not celebrated, then their creativity gets constrained. When you walk into any organization, you are paying very careful attention to the rules, to the rewards, the incentives. And all of these end up shaping your behavior. And so as an organizational leader, you have not just the opportunity, but the responsibility to think about what sort of environment you're going to create if your goal is to enhance creativity. So, and one important one is that if people feel as though they're going to get punished, if things don't work out perfectly, then they are going to be constrained in their creativity.
Tina, when you talk about constraints, I imagine the opposite side. So when you don't have constraints at all, and many times we talk about creativity with this logic of, okay, so exercise your brain and your imagination in a way where you don't have any sort of constraints. So is in our opinion, is this a tension between no constraints at all and extreme constraints to foster creativity, or you can do both ways?
Okay. So I want you to imagine a 2x2 matrix.
All right.
Okay. Imagine that. See, we're using imagination. Okay. Imagine a 2x2. And the vertical axis is creativity, high creativity, low creativity. And you have constraints on the other axis, right? So high constraints, low constraints. There are situations where you have high creativity with high constraints, just like we talked about Apollo 13. You can also have high creativity with low constraints. That's when you feel, so when you have the high constraints and high creativity, you feel like you're on a mission. I'm on a mission. Okay. You can have high creativity and low constraints when you feel like you're on an expedition. All right, think you're on vacation, you're taking a walk, and your mind is just wandering. You also, though, can fall below the line, okay, at the bottom half, where you have high constraints and low creativity. This is when you feel like you are like on a treadmill, and the constraints never stop. And you're exhausted and burned out, and and your creativity is squashed because, instead of being on a mission or on a sprint, you are now on this long marathon that you really can't sustain. You also can have low creativity with low constraints when you feel like you're on autopilot and you're doing something that's repetitive and boring and isn't challenging you. So the key is to stay above the line where you go between being on a mission and being on an expedition, going back and forth in order to maintain creativity. Now, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I realized in talking to people, every once in a while, you want to fall down into autopilot. There are times where you say, you know what, I need to just do some mindless answering of my email, right? I'm going to go and clean out a closet. I need to do something that doesn't take too much creativity in order to get recharged. But the key is, if you want to be creative, you really need to stay above the line.
And now connecting with something that you already started saying, staying above the line in an organization, as an organization. So how do you foster a culture of innovation within large organizations? You gave us a few hunches here: leadership, failure. But if you can elaborate a little bit more, we have a lot of people watching us from public organizations, large institutions, multilateral development institutions. So how can we foster this culture internally?
Yeah, I think the people who are leaders of any organization need to think of themselves as chief culture officers, thinking about what is the culture that they are fostering in their organization. And the thing that's really important is you need to have a pulse on how people are feeling. If everybody feels like you're in a fire drill all the time, people are just going to get burned out, and creativity and innovation is going to absolutely decrease. It's important to realize, if you need to have those sprint times when people are really motivated to get to a finish line, maybe it's a product launch, maybe it's a press release, maybe it's, a fundraising event. But then you need to have times where things slow down and you let people recharge before you possibly do that again. So understanding the ebbs and flows and managing people's energy, and especially their creative energy, is really, really important. Now, it's interesting because one, you can say, okay, leaders of organizations do this, but you have to think about there are leaders at all different levels of an organization, right? There's not just the CEO. There's the, people who manage teams or divisions, and then people, of course, who manage themselves. And so you can think about this at every level of an organization and think about the control that you have to manage your own level and to help people foster innovation, creativity in that area.
Tina, connecting to this that you just mentioned, I just received a question from someone who is watching us, which I really like, because I have seen and lived this quite a few times. So sometimes when discussing a solution to a problem, we hear, let's not get too creative here, even when everybody knows that change is needed. So how can we make a case for creativity and innovation when there is resistance to change?
I just love that. Let's not get too creative here. Honestly, I think if somebody were to say that in my presence, they would just think they would just not, like, I don't think anyone ever would say that to me. But I can understand an organization that is resistant to change, that wants incremental solutions as opposed to big ideas. I am a big fan of doing tiny experiments to see if your idea is going to work. If you, let's pretend that you have some idea that other people, that it's a big idea and it's something that you think is going to have a really big impact. And let's say I'm someone who's really resistant to change. If you come to me and you ask for permission to do it, look what you just did. You just transferred the risk to me.
Yeah.
Right. And now I have to make the decision if I'm going to give you permission to do this or going to support you in this effort. So if you don't ask for my permission, you can go and do some little experiments and come back to me with some data. Right. So if you do a little experiment and you go, I'm going to go talk to a few customers, or I'm going to go test this out in some way and see if it's going to work, and come back and show me some data, I'm much more likely to say, you know what, that's actually really interesting. Let's try it. But before I've seen that, I might be resistant.
Tina, I imagine this, and maybe I can give a little bit extra spice on this conversation. So many of us who work on the international public development sectors, we work in large organizations, and we have a challenge on how we maintain strict accountability as public servants with the governments that we serve somehow. And this logic of taking risks, being creative, how do you see this tension? And if you have seen or lived this at some point, this level of risk taking when you are dealing with public resources at the end of the day?
It's an interesting thing. One of my colleagues this quarter, said something that I thought was really interesting, and I'm curious if you agree or disagree with it. He does a lot of work. He's a really brilliant, cutting edge biologist, and he's doing a lot of consulting with the government about policy around CRISPR and all of these new biotech evolving technologies that are going to really have a big impact. And he said, the role of the government is actually to move slowly. And he said, we wouldn't want the government to be moving so fast. And even though it feels frustrating, that checks and balances and the fact that things happen very slowly is actually designed into the process to make sure that big decisions that have an impact very widely get debated and discussed for a long period of time before anything happens. So I'm curious if that's the case with you, because the question is it actually a feature, not a bug, that things go slowly? And that you can, and that you can have small organizations that you fund do those experiments, but that you would not necessarily internally make big changes until there was enough data to prove that something was going to work.
I think in general it's a feature, but I have seen over the years many times organizations on the public sector, trying to create this capacity of those small experiments within them. So creating room for experimentation somehow, talking openly about things that didn't work out. And I think, yes, the pace of change is slower for sure. But many times I think that the fact that the pace of change is slower is confounded by let's not change anything. And then maybe it becomes a bigger challenge. I don't know how you see that.
Yes, of course. Well, I am a big fan of big, bold ideas. I also really think that sometimes the ideas that sound the craziest on the surface are actually the most exciting. One of my favorite exercises I do with my students is I have them come up with the worst ideas for a problem. The worst way to solve a problem. And then have you seen me do this?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So it's really fun. We could have everyone do it right now if you want. People, we could just do it in your head. Where first I say okay, come up with the best idea you can for a family vacation, right? You're on a vacation with your family, right?
Yes.
Spring break. Okay. Yes. So we could come up, and you're at Disney World, right?
No, I'm in Miami.
You're in Miami. Okay. I thought I was imagining you were like in Florida. And okay. But the point is, we could come up with, the best ideas for a family vacation. And maybe people say Disney World or going into Hawaii or what. Okay. And then you go, okay, fine. Now come up with the worst ideas for a family vacation. Worst ideas. What could you come up with? What would be the worst thing you could think of?
Oh, I
know. Maybe people could send you to in the chat. I don't know. Some worst ideas. Maybe someone has an idea.
Let me check if I have something here on the chat. Give me a minute.
Okay.
I can imagine a very bad trip where everything goes wrong because I didn't plan accordingly.
Okay, so it's a trip where you didn't plan, and nothing is planned, right? Nothing is planned in advance. Okay, that's the worst trip you go on where nothing is planned.
People are saying Alaska at -30.
Okay, Alaska, brilliant. Alaska at -30. We could then, what I would do is take this idea that someone who on this group said is the worst idea they could ever imagine, and we give it to another group, and they have to come up with the best idea possible. Okay. And I can imagine, how are we going to come up? Let's work on this. How are we going to come up with the best idea for Alaska at -30? I'm thinking if it's -30, it's probably the winter. And in the winter, we're going to see the incredible northern lights.
Yes.
Right? We're going to have all the right clothes. They say there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. So we're going to have all the right clothes. I mean, that's easy.
Warm chocolate.
We have hot chocolate. Yes. Hot coffee with whiskey in it. I don't know. We're going to make a big fire, and we're going to watch the northern lights. It's going to be amazing. We're going to have sled dogs taking us around. What else?
I'm already starting considering this for.
Okay, exactly. And I think, you can think, okay, how many people would do this? And you can take this with every bad idea. And what you realize is so much has to do with your attitude. If you think something is a bad idea, it's going to look like a bad idea. But if you take the time to think, how might this work? Then all of a sudden the possibilities, just explode.
Amazing, Tina. Tina, if you can change a very traditional work environment to make it more innovative, what would you change first? And why?
So it's a really interesting question. What would I change first? Now, in one of my books, Ingenious, I talk about the innovation engine and all the levers for unlocking creativity. Now, there are the things that happen in yourself, right? Your knowledge, your imagination, your attitude. But if you run an organization, you work on the outside of the innovation engine, which is resources, habitat, and culture. Now, let's just talk about habitat. Habitat includes a lot of different things. It includes the physical space, the rules, the rewards, the incentives. As I said earlier, when you walk into an organization, you are paying very careful attention to the way things work. So I'll give you an example. At Google X, so that's their kind of big moonshot experiment arm. What they do is they literally have a process of celebrating failures. They have a big party, they have a celebration, people got to go on vacation if a project fails. Why? They want people to try really bold things and be willing to say, you know what, that didn't work, ta-da, here's what we learned from it, and we're going to go on. They don't want to keep putting good money after bad, right? So they don't want people to keep committing to something that isn't working. They also want to let people know that if you fail, it's okay. So people are willing. So you've now set a culture that celebrates taking some big risks. Because if you have a situation where people in the company see that those people who fail, now it's not failure of execution, not like you screwed up and you didn't order the right thing, you made a mess up. It's when you had an idea that didn't work. If those people get punished or fired, people are going to say, why would I have an idea? So that's the cultural thing. Also, something that people often don't think about is how important physical space is. This is our building here, Knight Hennessy Scholars, our Denning House is the name of our building.
Beautiful.
You should come visit. I was going to see if I could find some pictures of the inside. If you Google it, Denning House at Stanford, you can get some pictures. It is you walk in and you go, wow, we have a spectacular art collection, all this modern art from all over the world. We have a beautiful view of the lake. The ceilings are high. All of these things communicate when you walk in. This is a place where ideas are welcome. And so thinking about, even if you live in an office where there are cubicles or desks, what can you do to change that space, to put in some flexible rooms maybe, or to have, even silly things like lots of Post-its and Sharpies, and make it clear that this is a place where ideas are welcome. People are going to change their behavior to match what the space tells them to do.
Tina, your answer matches perfectly with another question that just came, which connects art and innovation. So the question is, similarly to innovation, art is a process of creative trial and error, although some say there's no error in art. In your view, is there a connection between art and fostering a creative mindset?
I think so. I think art is sort of the purest form of experimentation and expression. And people can make art in lots of different ways, right? I mean, there's certainly paintings, but you can make music, you can dance. There are lots of different ways to express yourself in whatever way you want. And I think it's why you see a lot of scientists are musicians and artists, that the creativity that they express in their work also is expressed in other parts of their lives. So practicing those skills is really important, because if you think about it, creativity comes from a bunch of different things, connecting, combining ideas, right? So if you're doing that, you can do that in art, and your brain is practicing connecting and combining things in interesting ways. Then your art, you practice it with art, you've now stretch those muscles so you can do it in other areas. So whether it's connecting and combining ideas, or challenging assumptions, or reframing, looking at things from a different angle, all of these skills that artists use come into play in coming up with innovative ideas. So the answer is yes.
I've been receiving a lot of questions and comments from colleagues and professionals who are educators, asking about how do you see the role of an educator in this entire process of fostering creativity. And you are one educator that has fostered and has been connected to a lot of them throughout your career. So what's your take on it?
I think the role of educators is just incredibly valuable. We have a problem, though, with our school systems, is that so often our schools are designed not to stimulate creativity. They're designed to get people through and to grade them and to treat them all as if they're the same. It's very important to look at kindergarten and elementary school and the places where kids are very creative, and to see what it is that we are doing as students get older to squeeze out that innovation. And we need to really think about that. I try so hard to give projects that don't have a right answer, that are very open-ended. In many cases, an assignment I give will be one word: sleep, memory, friendship, death. I'll give one word, and then they have to go and do an exploration and do need finding around this word, around this concept, frame a problem that they'd like to address based on what they've learned, generate at least 100 solutions, and then take those ideas and start testing them with little experiments. So I think there are absolutely ways to hone these skills, and it is absolutely critical for us to do this as educators.
Perfect. And another more practical question, Tina. You have shared so many amazing initiatives from Stanford, the private sector. You mentioned Google here. How do you think we can better take advantage of these players and those experiences to foster creativity in government?
So how do we take advantage of what we've learned in industry,
Yes.
in government? Yeah, no, I think the question is, what is, as we talked about before, what is the role of government, right? Is the role of government to be like industry and to move really quickly, or like startups? Or is it to be a little bit more measured and a little slower? I think that you can do some wonderful experiments. I think about one of our former students who became the mayor of Stockton, whose name is Michael Tubbs. And he became very interested, I don't know if you know who he is, in what is it called? What do you call the basic income? What is it called? Where they give everybody a same amount of money.
The basic
Yes. Where they give everybody an amount of money, $500 a month in order to see what do they do, and started with an experiment in his city. And it was so successful. I think they might have started with 500 people and watched what happened over the course of a year, and then said, wow, this was so exciting and so really effective. They learned a tremendous amount, that people actually use the money for the things they needed. One person said, I used it to buy a new pair of tires for my car. Another person said, I used it so I could pay for my child to go to a special enrichment program this summer. Another said, I used it to pay off my debts, or someone used it for their medication. And the idea is that everybody got to use it for what they needed. And that then experiment that they did with a few hundred people then was able to scale it. They brought in more resources and scaled it to a much larger group. It then became part of a statewide and national conversation. And then other cities started experimenting. So I think you don't have to necessarily think about government having to do everything from the tops down, but how can the government think about the bottoms up? How can the government empower other people to do experiments? And then you can see the results of those experiments. I think one of the reasons that John Hennessy, who, as in my colleague John, was so successful as the president of Stanford, is that he had the mindset, and he came from industry, right? I mean, he had started several companies. He understood the entrepreneurial world. He basically said, let me do what I can to make this, to empower everybody in the university. I bring in the best people I can and empower them to do amazing things. And then we will celebrate the things that they do. As opposed to feeling like from the tops down, you need to dictate, you let 1,000 flowers bloom.
The program that you just mentioned is Universal Basic Income.
Universal Basic, that's what I had the UBI, I couldn't remember universal, yes. Thank you.
All right. Tina, we're going to the end of this conversation, but I do want to ask you something about digital versus in person for creativity, and I'm asking this from two different standpoints. The first one, right after the pandemic started, that everybody went digital, we basically had to be creative and find new ways of keep being productive and keep creating opportunities for us to be innovative in our work. And I think many of the teams, including our teams at IDB, did an amazing job on adapting. At the same time, I must admit that I missed a lot of the serendipity that only the in-person could allow us to do.
Right.
So how do you see those strategies that we are working and talking here, working in a digital or hybrid type of work environment?
Yeah, it's so interesting because there are certainly pros and cons to being online versus in person. But look at this. We wouldn't have been able to do this in person, right? There's no way you're in Miami. I mean, I'm in California. I don't know where everybody is who's on this call. They're all over the place. So it would have been completely unrealistic to bring people together. But the fact that we can do this online allowed us to bring people together who couldn't have done it before. I also spent a lot of time figuring out how to teach online, or we had to go put everything online. I found that there were some things we could do online that I couldn't do at all in person. The fact is, you can ask people questions. They can all submit their questions, and then you can curate those questions in a classroom, right? Everybody raises their hand. You have no idea what they're going to ask. So I love the fact that I could say, what are your questions? I put them in, and I can pick the questions that are going to really move the conversation forward. I can also put up a digital whiteboard. I don't know if you end up using that on Zoom.
Yes.
I loved it. At the end of every class, I'd put up a digital whiteboard and have everybody put all their biggest takeaways from the class. Take a picture of it, and we'd have this beautiful sort of poster for every class with all of the lessons learned. There were lots of tools that we have developed as a result of the limitations we've had. And some of them I brought back to my classroom and said, okay, at this point, let's go on our computer and use this tool as opposed to doing it in person. So I think with the right mindset, you can really squeeze the creative juice out of every situation and figuring out what you can do. I've been asking a bunch of people recently, if there's anything they're nostalgic for from the pandemic. Is there anything for you? Anything you miss?
I miss the capacity of doing and connecting with people that I wouldn't be able to connect. So I did sprints with people in 10 different time zones, which wasn't possible to think about.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm nostalgic even when the pandemic hit, we just cleaned out our calendars, right? Everything fell off the calendar, and you got to all of a sudden start realizing what was really important, what was not important. You got to see what friends you really wanted to make the time to see and to connect with. And even if it was virtual, it was a whole reset of our lives. That was a really interesting opportunity. As I said, I think that for many people, there's some aspect of nostalgia for the fact that things slowed down. We questioned everything. We got to look at everything with fresh eyes. We're at a global shutdown. What's that?
I have a question on the opposite side of that for you, if you allow me.
Yeah.
There is a question here on how to foster innovation and creativity under the constraint of busy teams, or people that think they have to deliver and don't have time to think things over.
So how to foster creativity when people are really busy?
Yes.
Well, I would invite you to think about how might you carve out a space, each week and say, okay, this is a time we're just going to go take a walk. We're just going to go and have an unstructured hour. How do you, I think sometimes I look at my calendar. If I show you my calendar, it's like totally ridiculous. And then I say, who did this to me? And I realized I did it to myself. I did it to myself. And so I've started blocking out times when I say, I will not take any meetings except for you. I will not take meetings before 10 a.m. so that I have the mornings. I always want to have the mornings free to do work on a project before 10 o'clock. Yes. That is something that I'm thinking about. I can get it, on paper before the busy day begins. So carving out and trying to do that with teams, saying, okay, let's preserve some time during the week where we have no meetings.
Tina, we're getting closer to our end here, and we have two more questions that I want to share with you. The first one, what are the best incentives to transform creativity into innovation? What are the mechanisms that you have seen that work best to turn ideas into tests and concrete things?
Okay, so going from creativity to innovation is a really interesting thing, because most people could stop at creativity, right? You could have one more cover band, you can have one more coffee shop. How do you push yourself to be innovative as opposed to stopping at creativity? First is knowing whether you really need to be innovative in this situation or not. So thinking about, is this a place where we need to do this? And then making sure that you are very clear with everyone the difference between creativity and innovation, and say, fine, let's celebrate the fact that that was a creative idea. Let's push it further. As I alluded to before, I require my students to come up with at least 100 solutions to every problem. They sometimes think I'm a crazy person, but it's often number 97 that actually is the really interesting idea. And they wouldn't have gotten there if they just went with the incremental solutions of, the first 90. So it's really important to push yourself. It's hard work. And just because it seems like creativity sounds like lots of fun, there is also a lot of hard work to really stretch yourself. It's often easier if you have a facilitator, somebody who's going to be there to help you navigate this process and is going to be like a coach. Think about if you're an athlete, you might have a coach who's going to say, okay, you can do 3 more sit-ups, or, add a little bit more weight to those barbells, right? Someone who's going to push you and to get you to that finish line. So that's really important. And then one thing to keep in mind when we talked about scaling is if you think about, and I think this is a great place to end because it's really important, imagination, creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Not every person is going to have all of those skills, but every organization needs to cover all of those bases. You need the imaginers who basically engage in the world and envision what might be different. You need the creative people who are motivated to solve the everyday problems and are willing to do some experiments to see how they'll work. You need the innovators who are able to reframe the problem and look at it with fresh eyes. And you need the entrepreneurs who really can scale the idea and inspire other people. And this is very, very important for you to know where you like to play on this invention cycle, how you like to play, and bring in people who complement you on that journey.
Tina, amazing conversation. Before we close, I want to give you the floor to share a little bit more about the Knight Hennessy, where people who are watching us here can find more information or anything that you want to share. And I'm receiving a couple of messages from colleagues from IDB telling I'm not a Hennessy Scholar alumni, but I'm a proud Stanford alumni. So
great. Go Cardinal. So I encourage you to take a look at Knight Hennessy, KNIGHT Hennessy, HENNESSY, Knight Hennessy Scholars. Take a look at that on the website. You'll find a lot of things we're doing. There are a few things I want to point out are projects we do with our students that are very exciting. They all are invited to do keystone projects. And we start the year where students get up at our Ideas Festival and pitch ideas for projects they want to work on. Most of them have a social bent, whether it's in education or homelessness or policy. And teams form around them. Teams from all different disciplines come together to work on these projects. We give them some money to help them with the project. We give them mentorship. And at the end of the year, there's the Keystone Project Showcase, where they show what they've done. And the first year, they can get up to $1,000. If the project rolls over, they can get up to $5,000 the next year. If it rolls over, they can get up to $10,000 the next year. And we're just this next week launching our global impact fund, where they can apply to get up to $100,000 if they're starting a nonprofit with one of these projects. So that's exciting. We also take the students. Every student gets to go on a global trip. We take them all over the world to different places with an educational focus. For example, I'm going to be going to Jordan on a trip in June with the students, and the focus is on water. There's trips that went to Israel and Palestine. There was a group that went to Chile and went down to Patagonia to study the environment. We had people go to Turkey, to the groups. Anyway, all over the world for different projects. It's very exciting. Also, I'll land on this. We do about 50 programs a quarter, 50 programs for them, 50 events, and the scholars themselves put on another 50. So there are at least 100 events that go on every single quarter, either run by the team or by the scholars. And every quarter there is a theme. So fall quarter this year was environment and climate. Winter quarter was policy and government. And this quarter is philosophy and ethics. And next quarter, we already have the plan for the themes for next year, and we're already building out the program. So hope you'll check it out. It's something I'm very, very proud of. And please tell your students, anyone who's been out of undergrad up to 6 years can apply to grad school at Stanford and get funding from us.
And please don't forget also that you can connect to IDB and the resources that we have. One invitation that I want to share with all of you on June 13 and 14, our colleagues on IDB Lab, our innovation lab at IDB are hosting the IDB Lab Forum in Bogota, Colombia. Please take a look on the page, idblabforum.org. It's going to be a super conference and place for those who work at the intersection of innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology, especially looking into Latin America and the Caribbean. And Tina, for the future, I would love to see how we can put together Knight Hennessy scholars talking and thinking about solutions for our region as well.
Great. Would love it. And I'd love to bring our students down to Brazil. Maybe we can cook something up.
All right, perfect.
Great.
And Tina, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I don't see a better way of celebrating World Creativity and Innovation Day and without talking to you. So thanks a lot. I know your agenda is super busy, but thanks for carving out this space for us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for the wonderful interview.
And thanks a lot for everybody who joined us here virtually on social media. And I hope you had an amazing and inspired conversation with Tina. And I hope you can apply this into your future jobs and endeavors. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye. Thanks, Tina.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.